Well, Gaza's future is due to be discussed by the Palestinian Authority president here in Qatar. Mahmoud Abbas is flying to Doha to meet the Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Well, Ilan Pappe is an Israeli historian and author of The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. He's joining us here in our Doha studio. Very good to have you with us. So I want to ask you, first of all, about this visit by Mahmoud Abbas. Right from the start, the Israeli government, backed by the US, has said that in order for the Palestinian Authority to have any role in the future of Gaza, then it has to be rejuvenated. How difficult does that make it for Mahmoud Abbas when he is making an attempt to be part of the negotiating process?
It would be very difficult for him to be relevant because in the eyes of the Israeli government for quite a while, he's not relevant. The only function that he seems to serve as far as the Israeli government is concerned is some sort of security coordination to keep the lid on the potential uprising in the West Bank. I don't think the Israelis are at all interested in consulting him about the day after in Gaza. I think there's more interest in the United States. I think Washington is more keen to have the PA as part of the post-war, if you want, arrangement. But if I may say so myself, I think it would be a terrible mistake for the PA to be part of it, as this is going to be seen by so many Palestinians as collaborating with the destruction of Gaza and the Israeli visions of the post-war Gaza, which is definitely very, very opposite for what most Palestinians would have liked.
I want to ask you about the credibility element of it, because one could perhaps understand the view of Palestinians in Gaza, but one would also imagine that Palestinians in the West Bank who've been living under the Palestinian for a long time would have a particularly jaundiced view, because the credibility of the Palestinian Authority has not been great over the last several years.
Not very much. I would say even more the legitimacy, not just the credibility. And the longer the Israeli operations continue, and they will continue, unfortunately, for quite a while, the more difficult it would be for people in the West Bank to remain relatively, I say relatively passive, because quite a few young Palestinian factions have been trying to join the resistance in Gaza. But of course, it's very difficult because the Israelis are using very oppressive methods in Gaza. So I think, yes, I think that if we already know that the credibility was undermined, it's going to be further undermined if the PA would be seen to be part of a coalition that gives a green light to Israel to implement its ideas for how to rule Gaza in the end of the war. And the war is not very near ending. We should take this into account. So we really don't see any role for the PA in the next 15 months, because this is more or less the period in which the fighting will continue. And I don't think there will be any substantial negotiations anyway about the day after.
Okay, I want to get your opinion with regard to that fighting that you're talking about. As we know, Benjamin Netanyahu has instructed the Israeli military in order to carry out, put plans together for an operation to move into Rafah. That has prompted a significant response, a very, very critical response from the US, the UK, various supporters of Israel, including, of course, aid agencies as well. Is there an indication, do you think, that this is the point at which the support that the Netanyahu government has been receiving up to now is starting to fracture? It's starting to back away? Is this a sign that people are saying, no, pushing 1.4 million Palestinians into a corner of Gaza in Rafah is simply too far?
I wish I would be a bearer of good news, but I'm afraid that history teaches us that strong American language of condemnation very rarely is supported by actions. And the Israelis have a way of kind of taming, or at least allegedly taming their actions, creating the impression that this is not really a military operation, it's a limited operation. They will find a way that would satisfy an American administration on election year in a way that, unfortunately, as far as the Palestinians in Rafah are concerned, would be quite meaningless. The same, I think, is true about the EU and the European governments. I think that they are very easily induced by Israel to take a strong position in words, but not to translate them into actions that could have bring an end to the fighting. So I think that the Israeli army will attack Rafah. I don't think that the Israeli plans for how to deal with the refugees are going easily to materialize. We hope and we need a strong international reaction now, because once the Israeli operation will begin, it will be even more difficult to stop them.
Mm-hmm. The fact that Benjamin Netanyahu went public and said that he had instructed the military to make this plan for a push on Rafah at this particular time when there are negotiations, albeit fairly fragmented, we don't have a lot of details, about working towards some sort of timeline towards a ceasefire. Is there a sense that that the timing of this announcement is in some way connected to the negotiations and to put perhaps pressure on the negotiators, perhaps on Hamas itself, to try to move along with some sort of solution?
I think Netanyahu is recently talking mainly to his electoral base more than to anyone else. And his electoral base is made of people who care little about those who've been captured in Gaza. They want to see the continuation of the military actions. They want to see a stop for international aid to Gaza. So when he talks in Hebrew to the Israeli public, he talks to his base. When he talks to the American media, he tries to sound a bit more pragmatic, a bit more inclusive. But I don't think that we should take these kind of statements by Netanyahu as part of an indication of a policy. This is an attempt to, from the very beginning, to use the military operation to save his skin. Because everything Netanyahu has done from the 7th of October until today, from his perspective, is calculated to make sure that he's not going to lose his grip on the government because of all the other problems that he faces. So his decision eventually to order the army to go to Rafah is not out of a military consideration or even strategic one. It is one that he thinks that his base would like to hear. Would it really, how would this translate into orders, practical orders to the army? It's difficult to say, but I wouldn't portray the Israeli army as a dovish institution that is hesitant to attack Rafah. So I think we still need the regional and international community to take seriously the possibility that the catastrophe that we have seen in Gaza is going to be far worse when Israel begins the attack on Rafah, and they have the intention of doing it unless they will be stopped from the outside.
Yeah, I want to take this slightly wider because we have about a minute left. An Egyptian official has been quoted as saying that any attempt to relocate Palestinians into Egypt would simply collapse any sort of agreement between, security agreement between Egypt and Israel. Is this a risk that actually Israel is in a position to take, given the level of control that it relies on from Egypt over the border with the Sinai Desert?
It's a risk the Israelis will take. I think they understand that the Egyptians are not going to open the border and let in the refugees. They still hope they will, under the pressure. But I think there is a plan B for the Israelis that it doesn't happen. And the fact that this would, result in a huge human catastrophe is not something that inhibits the Israelis from implementing that program. The mood in Israel, and that's the mood Netanyahu is relating to, is vindicative still, very vindicative, dehumanizes the Palestinians, very little compassion for the Palestinian suffering, and therefore the domestic scene in Israel has no problem with a wide operation in Rafah, whatever the human consequences of that operation will be.
Ilan Pappe, we appreciate you giving us the benefit of your expertise in this. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.